What you're about to hear is a conversation with Gabe from Helmgast about running Kult Divinity Lost. We invited him to share his experience and perspective as a game designer and GM, and to talk through how the game works at the table. This discussion assumes that you, the listener or viewer, have at least some prior experience with GMing role-playing games. We are not presenting this as a step-by-step tutorial or a classroom-style teaching session. Instead, this is a practical, conversational deep dive into mechanics, intent, and how GM and player moves function in actual play. Now, with that in mind, let's get into the conversation. Hello, and welcome back to the Illusion Horror and Con YouTube channel, where we are continuing our conversation with Gabe the Herald on how to GM Kult. This is episode 5 of our series of X number of episodes. We're not quite sure how many it's going to be yet. But yeah, episode 5, and we are continuing our conversation about combat. So this is part 2. If you missed part 1, you can stop this video and go look at the part 1 of combat. And yeah, joining me today, along with Gabe, is the other third of the Illusion Horror and Con, David. So if if you want to introduce yourself.
I think you already did. So, David. I do also other projects, such as the Guide to the Black Madonna. And if you have not seen that one, where we dissect and analyze the massive cult campaign with a bit of insight and obviously some aspects that I'm taking away from here and apply it to the campaign setting. So if you haven't watched it, links are in the descriptions below as well. And thank you for being here and joining us for another part of how to run cult, especially combat.
And I guess that's me now. I am Gabe. I've been with Helmgast for the past 4-ish years. And I work with Paternalo, the creative director of Kult. I write, do some of the graphic design. I help them run the social media and talk to people and bridge the company to fans. And you can find me doing that pretty much anywhere Kult is mentioned. If not physically talking, at least in spirit and me lurking. And we're here today to talk about combat. My favorite topic, not because I enjoy combat most of all, but because I have a lot to say about it. And these people want to hear.
Give the people what they want.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna ramble today again.
Well, I guess we can start our ramblings with gauging and managing the difficulty in combat. If you want to start to ramble on that.
Yeah, so the most important thing is that there's no inherent balance to the combat, because you as the GM can do pretty much anything. If you say an attack deals a serious harm without chance of enduring injury against, that's up to you. If you say that an attack kills the player character outright, you can do that as well. So since you can do pretty much anything and combat balance falls on you as the GM, you have to have a certain feeling about when to do stuff or not. But I want to begin with David and Chris, and I want to ask you, have you had any problems? And if so, where and how, when it comes to dealing lethality in combat? For example, have you had a player die and it wasn't in your plans at all? Or did you fail to gauge that like 4 harm would probably kill someone?
I actually had the latter in my first Black Madonna campaign, where one of the players attacked a certain general and basically flung himself onto him in a raged attack to kill him, which he succeeded. What he didn't realize or notice was that this certain general has pulled a hand grenade while he attacked him. And so while he was on top of him, the grenade exploded. However, he was by that point already quite enlightened, and he had invulnerability, and so the overall lethality of a hand grenade exploding a few inches below you was for some reason not as lethal as intended. He got severely hurt with critical injuries and stuff, but like it did not outright kill him by that point. This abomination still survived this.
I don't think I've had a death be unintentional. I think my style is a bit more conservative in the combat area. So when I do combat, I'm very cognizant of not trying to kill the players unless it is maybe at the very end, like we're ending things or something. I do my best to try to keep combat lethal and or having consequences, but I don't think it's most of the time I don't think it's very interesting to kill players. And I think there's that trope. I think a lot of people get it from other games where it's more GM versus players. And it's like, oh, the GM is always trying to kill the players. And I feel like I have to correct people a lot. Like, I don't want to kill the players. I don't think that's interesting. I think it's much more interesting for other consequences to happen to your characters as a result of any combat I might do.
Yeah, I agree. And hence why the last episode I talked a lot about choosing what to focus and when, and bring consequences, like hard choices, to the narrative. And that's what I wanted to emphasize with this, because a lot of people ask me about how to manage lethality. And what I have to say is that you cannot pretend that something won't deal 5 harm. You cannot pretend something won't deal a serious wound. So what you can do is offer choices and let the player choose between the outcomes sometimes, or have the chance to roll. And if you have this person with a hand grenade, you can either surprise the player, and if that's what you want, but you can also let him choose between going for the person with a hand grenade and possibly exploding, and letting the dice, answer that for you. But when it comes to creating situations and choices and all that, unfortunately, there's no hard and fast rule or sheet with bullet points for difficult moments in combat, because it changes between characters and between stories and between groups. And it heavily depends on what you find interesting and what the player would respond, and what the character and what makes sense for the character, right? So for this abomination, it would be nice to choose to go into a dive towards a hand grenade being, activated or whatever. But for most humans, this is a hard no. Like everyone knows that you have this instinctive knowledge in you that you will explode and die. So that, as you can see, for example, it is interesting for the abomination, but not for the agent, if we choose another archetype. But the idea is, if you visualize the pressure bar in your mind, and you know that as soon as you introduce the move, the chance to roll, the pressure bar remains the same, but you have the option to creating more problems or worsening an existing problem or whatever, or delivering a consequence that you've warned the players about. So if I say the general has a hand grenade, or I hint at it somehow, or it could be as simple as jumping, in the middle of the description, I say that jumping at the general seems like a tough, difficult thing to do because he's a man that is willing to die for his cause and he might explode. I'm not saying that he's going to, but I'm warning you that it might happen. And you have the choice, and if you choose, then I already have this attack move in hand. So grenade for harm. I know that if the player fails, so -9, I might give the success to the abomination and let them do harm to the general. Maybe it's the last 2 harm and I trigger a die move, whatever. But I will also trigger this attack move. And if it's a 10 to 14, maybe in engaging combat, for example, or act under pressure or whatever you're rolling for that, I can deliver at half the harms. So instead of 4, it's 2. Or maybe not at all. Maybe I just worsen and create another opportunity. So you get him, you kill him, but the grenade falls, and now you have the chance to avoid harm. So dodge out of the explosion range. So this is where the lethality comes in. If you keep giving the player opportunities to dodge your threats, this is a less lethal combat. So you can jump at the general, but you can roll to avoid harm. And if you roll to avoid harm, you can roll to endure injury. Because if you fail at the avoid harm, I might just give you a wound, and that's very much lethal. Or you might take the 2 or 4 harm or whatever and roll to endure injury. And this is yet another chance to not mark a wound. Though you will be hurt, that's implied in the fiction. But it might just be that it's an heroic wound. It may be shrapnel that you're just like, you have a lot of flesh wounds, but your leg hasn't exploded. But it's much less lethal, And if you roll 15 plus in the avoid harm and in the engage in combat or act under pressure, then that's me not being able to deliver on the threat of exploding a grenade on you. So what I need people to do is think that whenever a roll is involved, it can be, avoided. That's a softer GM move. And if the player cannot roll to endure or avoid or deal with this threat, that's a much softer move. And lethality is about, balancing hard and soft moves. For a truly lethal game, you would tell the abomination you can jump at him and tear his throat with your claws. But he has this dead man switch, and as soon as he falls dead, the grenade's going off, and you will take a critical wound, and your leg is gonna be blown out. Do you want to do that? So that's a very lethal game, because there's no way to avoid the grenade. That said, a lot of GMs have said in a recent conversation about combat that they fear killing the players or dealing too much harm or they pull punches. They fear this situation where the character dies, because combat can be so lethal. I just told you that you can simply deal a critical wound to the player and there's nothing the player can do about it. And that's very much true. And some creatures, they indeed are very, very strong. To stop pulling punches, you have to be fairly confident in what you want out of the combat, and what you're focusing on should matter, and you should be bringing more hard choices than harm and wounds. So making players choose between staying and fleeing, or for example helping this friend or that friend, or creating an opportunity for this friend or that friend, or helping or hindering. And for truly difficult opponents like a Blictor or a Reside, if you don't want to kill the players, you should have something that both parties are struggling to control. So it might be someone that you want to help escape the opponent. It can be environment control, like pulling a lever and stopping the dangerous thing from happening. It can be getting the MacGuffin from the opponent. And with these things, you have much more room to balance the lethality and asking for rolls and simply delivering on consequences. So, because I can tell you that you can dive for the MacGuffin, but the creature will get to attack you, and that might be a serious wound, but you can get harm instead if you roll well, or not be harmed at all. Or I can tell you that the person you want to help escape the rest side will run to one direction, and the rest side will run to another. And if you don't get the rest side, the person will be, targeted again. And so you have to think on your feet as a player to see whether you want to get the person or finally have this final encounter with the rest side, who deals 3 to 4 harm to multiple targets at once, but is for some reason unwilling to fight you here because I have my own agenda with the rest side, and now it wants to flee. So, and as a player, you can be curious about why, and this is an opportunity to, expand the story and all that. So, pulling punches, sometimes you just have to deal the serious wound. You just have to deal the 4 harm and let things progress from there. Mm-hmm. You do not need to be dealing wounds, because if you look at injury, one of the options is losing something. For the 10 to 14 range is losing something or being thrown off balance. This can be a -1 to your next roll, -1 ongoing. Being thrown off balance can be even like emotional shock. So I resist the rest side stabbing me, but now I have to look it in the eye very up close and roll to keep it together to not fall for shock. And losing something, you can be disarmed, you can lose control of the person you want to help escape, you can lose control of the MacGuffin. There's a lot that can happen in combat that isn't necessarily being harmed. But in this case, I was clearly stabbed, but this didn't turn into a serious wound, so I don't get a -1. And it is, at max, something that the GM can say as a GM move later, that you're still bleeding, you're gonna pass out. Would you roll to keep it together to remain awake and fighting to be, present in the battle? So just think of consequences of combat to be little nuggets you can pull on. And if the stab did turn into a serious wound, then re-triggering it later as you're bleeding, you're gonna pass out, you cannot move. This is gonna be a much harder, by definition, move, because all rolls have a negative modifier. And just stop pulling punches in general. If someone dies, you play to find out. That's what happens. But I realize most of the time that's not what you want, and you don't want players to be locked in hospitals. But you can also pretend that damage isn't all that grievous, and the player will have a cast around their arm, and they will be still able to act without the need to, be in the hospital for 3 months or whatever. Whew, that was a lot.
I think this is a good point to remind people that because of all this freedom that you have as a GM, and because you're playing a lot of this based on vibes, it's good to remember that it is, like I was saying before, it is not GM versus players. You are all playing together, and you all want a good story. So it's not about killing your players or putting them in the worst possible situation. In the book, it explicitly talks about being a fan of the players and being somebody who is rooting for the player characters. And so, keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind that you want a good story where everybody is having fun. This is not a game to be won. This is a story to be told. And the GM is playing with the players as well.
I very much agree. You shouldn't see combat as a way to dunk on your players, because really there's no there's no balance in this. I can, as a GM, I can just say the Reside cuts your head off, because most Resides, the ones made for killing, are probably lightning fast. You can't even see them move. Most of the time, especially in the usual scenario, has lightning fast Resides and Lictors. But even for Purgatides, they don't feel pain, and their entire body might just be a weapon. So, how do you deal with someone that is full of, wrapped in barbed wire, lunging themselves at you for an embrace, every 30 seconds? You just cannot, realistically fight that. So don't be after killing your players. But sometimes, if you have told the players as a soft move that they can, get into the death maze of Inferno in the nth circle of this network of purgatories run by this Nephirite, and they are sure they're gonna die if they go inside, but they wanna have the chance to do so, then that you've warned them more than enough, probably, that someone's gonna die. And if they do, we're gonna talk about it later. Probably there's timestamps in the description of this video that you can just move to that, but we're gonna talk about death. And I have rambled enough. Any thoughts, David?
There's not much I can add to all of this. I think, as we mentioned in the other videos, be aware of having read and understood the GM principles is a good start for just communicating the game well. Make sure the expectations for the game are set properly, that every player understands this is the tone, the theme of the game, and death or heavy combat might ensue. Or if combat ensues, you will have one action, and I want this then to be resolved, and it will be either in your favor or it will be against you. It's the easiest way to just, because personally I'm not really a fan of combat, contrary to my dear friend Gabe here. I find it often enough just doesn't lead much to the narrative story that I want to tell. So combat is for me just like a means to a explanation of, yeah, there needs to be some confrontation that happens, but like it is usually over in a sense of like Arasite attacks, slashes, and then either you're dead or you survive, but then he just looks for his next target. I think one of the points that I maybe wanted to also get a bit of, it's slight segue, but like I think it fits here quite well, and that is, as we mentioned in our last episode, the recovery and healing parts. So like when you get serious wounds, they usually kind of, depending on the wound, can be narratively explained away from session to session and so forth. But let's maybe focus a bit, because I think that's always a bit of a question too. Assuming you have a critical wound, gut is slashed and you're missing several intestine and internal parts after a big horrific fight with creatures that don't make sense for reality. During that downtime, when you're either in a hospital or treated about this, are there any other options that you would, both of you kind of would bring in order to advance the story? Or is it just like okay, so big fight is over, you go to the hospital, and then 3 months later we continue? How do you guys handle that? Because I feel like this is one of the most often overlooked parts, that there is a downtime when you are severely injured or are missing several limbs. Like, you're not just continuing. There will be a time for adjustment and adaptation, unless you turn into something else.
You want to answer, Crystal?
I mean, I have some ideas. If your character's in hospital, and recovering, odds are they're going to be in pain. They're going to be on drugs. They're going to be possibly in and out of consciousness. There's a lot of opportunity there to introduce the illusion, to introduce aspects of your story while they're laying in bed, helpless, more or less, which can help the story along. If your other players visit this person in the hospital, it's a good time for them to have scenes where they can debrief about what's happened, have, more personal scenes, something like that. You could also gloss over it and be like, 2 weeks later, and then they're better, and you can maybe have a montage of possible things that they've seen or who they've talked to, whatever. But yeah, I think hospitals are rather horrifying for most people, so I don't see why you couldn't integrate the story into a hospital situation.
Yeah, I like the introduction of the illusion, because if for a rest side attack, for example, that you would be severe, or a purgatide even, or even like a lot of other creatures, for example, maybe there's some supernatural venom in you. Being in a place where the illusion is strong, I'd say most hospitals have at least one wing where the illusion is weak. So let's hope that you stay in the area where the illusion is strong.
You just put you in there.
I feel like some stuff would be rewoven by the illusion, and even the memories of the player character about the encounter. So the supernatural venom might just become something that is easily treatable, or the brutal slashing of the rest side that you've survived in combat despite not being realistic to do so. Perhaps you were in the borderlands of Inferno, and even after losing gallons of blood, you still continued to fight. Maybe when you reach the hospital, you don't die, and you begin to forget some stuff about the encounter, about the rest side, about what happened, and the place where it happened, like, sort of drifts away from the illusion and becomes this place you will only be able to access through your memories and dreams. So that's a really good one, and very cultish. And I've never done it, because I usually just kill people. But that's a very, very good idea. And
Write
I
it
wanted
down.
to I wanted to bring the thought of, you don't take the story to a place you don't feel confident it's gonna be fun. And you can see that in slasher movies most often, especially the last sequels of Scream. So like the 5 one, like half of it takes place in a hospital, and you see that the characters have been slashed and they have been admitted into the hospital, but they manage to find the strength and continue fighting. And this is you as the GM leaning into sub-genres of horror. And if you have a rest site bent on killing the player characters, it might just be that you have to bend the story towards a slasher sort of feel. And you can look at other subgenres, like extreme horror often has people going through like the most absurd bodily damage, and they continue to act. Laughing Matters and Night Carnage in Broken Reflections draw heavily from this unrealistic damage to the body, like splatterpunk damage. Night Carnage, Carnage is heavily inspired by the typical 90s cult and vampire and, these kinds of games where you just keep getting shot and keep getting stabbed and you continue to act. And Laughing Matters, the one that I wrote, is played out in the borderlands of a dream, and the creature having this dream takes heavy pleasure from the violence. So you are expected to cut someone's head off and see the blood geyser explode, and there's blood everywhere, and your limb is torn off, but you continue to act, and maybe later you attach it to yourself again. So, subgenres, there's a lot you can do. And if you went for a realistic, system, you can pause the game and tell the players that you want to change things a little because it feels boring to be trapped in a hospital. And I think that's fine. I think most people would like this, would like to experience the shift in the narrative. And it makes for a nice, even maybe atmospheric, like immersive thing to see yourself in a slasher movie, in a Terminator sort of scenario where you just keep getting hurt, but you have to flee the creature. Otherwise, plenty of stories you can tell from a hospital bed with passage of time, and there's even I can make an argument that you can bring a lot of horror into this just by having the player unable to leave the hospital and create an entire narrative about not seeing the time pass and not seeing how the plan is going and if the mission has succeeded. And then suddenly someone important to you stops calling, stops coming back, and then you don't know what's happening, and maybe you dream of them and you explore this whole thing. But that escapes the scope of most campaigns, I think. So I just would rather change the genre that I'm playing with.
I think that's also a good point that you mentioned earlier, is that depending on the type of players that you have at your table, you can leave it to them to say what happens to them. I mean, I play with many people who tend to imagine more horrifying things for their player characters than I do. So if I happen to be playing at that table, then I might just say, "What do you think is happening to your character as they lay on this bed, you know, hopped up on morphine or whatever other drugs are pulsing in your system? What's going on with you? What are you thinking about? What is happening to you?" And that can also be a lot of fun for player characters to involve them. I mean,
Yeah.
Cult is collaborative storytelling, right? So it's
Yeah, and on that, you can also say if I'm running a game for David and Crystal, and David just got handled by the rest side and has to be in the hospital because we are going for the gritty, realistic, campaign. But Crystal has to solve the problem that they are after solving. So she continues to act, but David will be in the hospital. We can have scenes. Maybe we don't want David out, but we can give him a laptop, like a notebook sort of thing, and get him acting. We can give him a cell phone and have him make calls and do stuff. I can, again, introduce the Borderlands and have him act through dreams and explore memories and all that. But I can also tell and work it out with the players if they are inclined that David will roleplay certain people interacting with Crystal at least for the week he is in the hospital. So we shift between both of them, but say that David calls his relation and the relation is a good friend, and the good friend will be helpful to Crystal in the upcoming mission to raid the Reside's hideout and finally kill him. I can work it out with David to control this good friend, and he won't be able to make moves for the friend because the friend is not a player character. But if anything, it's gonna, we're gonna choose like 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses for this character. And whenever the strengths come into play and he is helping Crystal can get a bonus to the roll, for example. So there's options, and the player should be inclined, to roleplay a non-player character for once, or maybe interact with the environment a little. Say when it's raining, when it's sunny, what dangers can be in the place. But that is like a step up the usual player role. And I don't know if many people like doing that. I think in Kult they do. They might like get some pleasure in feeling in control, like in full control.
Yeah.
That's an option. And by all means, I guess it's nice to see David getting up with the drip thing from the hospital and, I'm going to get my gun and I'm going to kill the rest side, and then just get his ass handled to him again. Or, I don't know, just rolling really well and killing the rest side for once. For me, that's just fun. But I am a combat enjoyer. I like the violence.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding the hospital scenes, if you're looking for inspiration, I guess if you happen to come across Clive Barker's Nightbreed or his book Cabal, there's a good kind of ideas of what could happen in a hospital weds. Recuperation time, however, not really. But that just might
Steal
not
from
work.
media.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Steal
always
from
be stealing.
Always be stealing. People are going to clip
Always.
that and
Always
take it
be
out of
stealing.
context. Always be stealing
I mean, what I
other
tell
IP.
what I tell GMs and players is that we're not here to write a epic thing. We don't have to turn this campaign, this session, into a masterpiece of horror media. We're not gonna film this. We're not gonna even write this as session notes. And certainly no one's gonna take the time to write 300 pages out of this campaign. So you shouldn't be really concerned with covering every plot hole and explaining away everything that happens. In fact, I feel like GMs should step down a little into the player mindset and let themselves forget some plot holes just as players do. Like, forget some details, forget that some stuff happened somewhere along the way, and just keep rolling with it and take stuff from other media. And if you really like the opening to whatever movie, you can just play it out in your game. You can have your own version of it. It doesn't really matter as long as you have fun. So always be stealing. That's the takeaway.
Stealing.
There's also the idea of image library when you start to study drawing and painting. That the more you consume stuff and the more you see people doing stuff, the larger is your image library to solve problems in drawing. So you remember how someone drew a leg or painted the face, and you draw from that, you draw from those ideas, and that's like stealing like an artist. And you can have the same for storytelling if you consume a lot of stories and you analyze and dissect stories. So if you take a moment to watch the movie you enjoy the most and try to see that as a scene in the game, and when someone has rolled and what result it was and what the GM move was in response and where the story branched from that, and you realize that there's a lot you can do and a lot you can steal, and you'll be stealing things and applying them to scenes you don't even see the connection. So you can see a character getting up a hospital bed and continuing to act, and you like how epic it feels, and you like that it plays with overcoming pain, and you like the idea of seeing the character hurt and fighting one last time, and then you do that in a completely different setting, and that works, and that's you stealing, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So always be stealing and looking for opportunities to steal.
Yeah.
And let players do that as well. So if they see
Absolutely.
the character doing that in a movie and they want to do that in the game, you should probably let them do it.
Encourage it.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we continue about heists next, let's maybe focus a bit more on a couple other points that we might have not talked about yet. For one, as it comes to hurt, damage, and danger, we also have relationships and their connections to the player characters. If they get hurt, severely hurt, or even die, it affects the players as well, or vice versa. Do you have a good example of a nice relationship event that happened and affected the players, and how did you kind of support this? And then maybe Gabe can afterwards give us a bit of an idea of how the mechanics and rules support the whole idea.
You're asking me.
Both of you?
Both of us? Okay. Gabe, you want to start?
In my most recent game, the one that I ran today, it's about a character in the borderlands of dreams and dreams. And he connects with some people, at least, well, one character in the future that they meet through the dream. And this character in the future helps him in a current investigation. So he is in New York in the early 2000s, like 2001. And this character is in Chicago, 2010. And from the future, she rings she has a thing to calling telephones in the borderlands and getting to him, like sort of Matrix style. And she tells the character, "Oh, you made an arrest. This is the man. You're gonna find him there. Na, 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 na. Oh, this man will try to attack you. It's in the news of 2000 and whatever in September. So this day, and you know." And there's this antagonist that also has a contact in the future that has warned him that he's gonna be arrested by the player character. And he said that all evidence of him has to be erased. Otherwise, this contact of his in 2010 will be hurt. And the player character has no way of defending her in the future. You know, he cannot, at least not in this campaign, he can't. But he cannot walk the corridors of time and arrive at Chicago 2010 and talk to her and keep her safe and bring her a gun. She's just gonna get hurt. And so he has to make a choice. Do I make this arrest of this vile person? Or do I let them go and save my character? My friend, sorry. And this is my most recent relationship conundrum. Should I save them? Should I let them be hurt? And the relation moves obviously get used. The one that says wish no harm, you have difficulty bringing harm to the people you love or like. And when you do actively do so, you have to keep it together with a negative modifier equal to the relation. So for this character, it's a +1, manageable. But if it were a -2, I think he would fail to make the arrest because he wouldn't be able to bring harm to the friend. It's a very likely failure in keeping it together. -2, I mean. But yeah, that's my example. Do you have one, Crystal?
I do. It was a recent game that so it was set in Italy, and one of the player characters met up with their friend. It was a family friend, and the player character was trying to remember something from the campaign. The main antagonist was a madness magician, and they also worship She Who Waits Below, and part of the worship and her manipulation of people was through a song that people can't remember. And he was trying to remember it, and this player character had contagious insanity, and so he used it on his friend to try to help him remember the song because she had also heard it from somewhere as well. And, I made him aware. I was like, well, this is going to harm your friend. So do you really want to get this song? Do you really want to have her help you remember this, even though this is going to cause harm to her? And he decided yes, and he rolled for his stuff, and he ended up remembering. But later, She left the meeting and went back to her house. Later, when he went home, he had maybe 40 messages on his answering machine. And it was just a series of her going progressively more crazy and ultimately removing her eyeballs with a spoon over the phone. And yeah,
that's horrifying. That's very disturbing.
Yeah.
But I realize our examples went away from the combat theme. The combat
kind
topic.
of, yeah. So it's not there's no combat. I guess for my example, like with the contagious insanity, could have been the start of a combat situation. She could have attacked him rather than just ran away and gone home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But why do we talk about relations? Because player character versus player character exists.
Mm-hmm.
And if she were to attack you, it would be nice to use as an example of when and why to call for moves. Because that's the topic we have written out for today.
Flawless segue.
So what to roll and when and why? For combat, because we talk a lot of pressure and choices, you as the GM have to have a fuller, like more expanded vision of the combat, in the sense that you have to be one step ahead of the players sometimes, or just be really good at responding to moves and taking opportunities to introduce danger. And this is an exercise I want people to do, like think through with us. When you get to combat, so you have the pressure thing, the pressure bar. And imagine that when you get to combat, it's already pretty high because the conflict, it is a problem unto itself. You can solve that problem in a number of ways. You can just roll to engage in combat once and be done with it. But we are assuming this is a higher point in the campaign that people want to focus on and, trade blows and see what happens and maybe someone dies or whatever. So you have this pressure bar and it's super high and you already have some assumptions about combat. So I can die. I can lose the MacGuffin. I can fail to protect this person. And you introduce this problem. Okay, so, and how do you introduce this problem, this combat? Either the player initiates it, or you initiate it either as a threat of combat that the player has to respond, or outright making an attack move for an opponent. So I can say, as the GM, I can say that you see the man getting the gun and he's gonna shoot at you. What do you do? Or I can say he picks up his gun super fast, points at you and shoots. Roll to endure injury, roll to avoid harm. So either of us can do that. And GMs have to understand that this is natural to all stories. It just happens. You don't have to roll for initiative here. You just have to follow the turns of the conversation. You get one turn as a GM and the players get one turn as players. But you have to place yourself as the game master between players at all times, but because you are the one framing the conflict and the problems and helping them or guiding them to solve problems that exist or worsen when they fail to solve those problems, or just let it stall and move to something else. But the idea is, again, you have this huge problem that you want to solve, that is combat. But inside combat, you have problems like, oh, I'm out of ammo. I fail to deal harm, and now I am thrown aside and cornered. And now I have to get out of this bad situation. This is a problem. Or, for example, I don't have a gun. I have to jump to get the shotgun that is lying on the ground. This is a problem. I am in such a deep fear, and this creature has revealed their true form, and I have to keep it together, or I have to muster at least, muster the strength and act under pressure or whatever. These are problems within the huge problem that is combat. So you have combat for a reason, and within you have smaller stuff. And you roll, or rather you ask for rolls the same way as you would in another situation, knowing that you can solve a problem as a GM. So the player wants to jump for a gun, I can solve this problem right away without a roll, just letting them go for the shotgun. Or I can ask for a move, so you can act under pressure here, or you can avoid harm, so you jump for the gun, but you might get shot. Or I can just negotiate, I can offer an opportunity with or without cost, so I can announce that there's a shotgun that they can dive to get, but they will get shot, and they will get 2 harm and roll to endure injury. So there's ways to solve this, but you don't want to initiate a problem or present an opportunity that won't get solved, at least most of the time. I mean, the shotgun can be left alone by everyone until the end of combat, but the player character being cornered and put in a bad situation and held at gunpoint, it has to be solved. Just like any other, situation in the campaign where the player lies to someone, that's a problem, and you might ask for a roll. Or the player wants to hack into a system, that's a problem, and you might ask for a roll. Wants to see through the illusion, same thing. It's always, creating and solving problems, adding and releasing tension, pressure from the game. And you call rolls again when it makes sense that trying to safely solve this problem would create another problem. And what role to call is highly dependent on what problems you want to introduce. So if I have a Reside walking towards me, he's severely injured by now, and I have this shotgun with 1 ammo left, and I have to get this lucky, or not so lucky, shot against his chest and maybe hindering him enough that I can run. I can roll I can ask you to roll to engage in combat, and by that I assume you are diving to the gun, lining up a shot, aiming and taking the shot, and the rest side will make a final run towards you. And when I roll for that violence, engage in combat, I am in my head thinking as a GM, okay, engage in combat here means that I can spiral the consequences towards avoid harm and endure injury, or act under pressure, or keep it together, for example. I have these options. Whereas, if the rest side stops in its tracks, picks up a blade from his, shoulder that's been there, and will throw it at me, I can act under pressure to shoot before the blade harms me, before I take a critical wound or maybe die, because it's a powerful creature. It can be super hard. I can tell the player, yeah, let's see if you can take the shot before you're dead because of this blade throw. And I know in my head that it might be the end, because I won't be creating any more problems beyond death. So if the player rolls to act under pressure and rolls a -9, they don't take the shot, they fail at it, and they die. 10 to 14, they take the shot, but also take the knife, and then I can either roll to endure injury, or, act under pressure, or again or whatever. I have this thing I can pull from it. But since I established the threat, I would give you take the shot, but you also take the blade and you probably die. But it depends. Crystal doesn't like to kill players, so she might allow for them to roll to endure injury. I myself would probably just kill them because I am delivering the threat of the blade. That's a problem I just created. And I want, as a GM, I need, as the GM, that my players understand that when I make a threat, when I create a danger, I deliver on it, and it makes the consequences and hard choices all the more important and thrilling for them. And they have to embrace the thrill of possibly dying because of this, as dumb as it can be, but it's a creature made for killing. It won't miss your head, with that blade. It will cut your head off or will pierce your heart. It can see your heart through the tethered clothes and blood and veins and flesh and bones, whatever, and will get it right. It can't miss. But so at 10 to 14, take the shot and take the blade, both die, and 15 plus, you take the shot and you dodge the blade, or it misses the blade because of the shot or whatever. I could roll to avoid harm, but you roll to avoid harm when it makes sense that you would push the player to a bad spot or sustain partial harm. It can be an end. So partial harm would be the grenade situation, for example, where instead of 5 harm, I deal 2, and you endure injury against 2 and not 5. Or partial harm can mean that instead of a serious wound, you get to endure injury against 4 harm. So that's another level of lethality to that grenade. And this blade, probably. So the blade would be straight up killing, but it can be a critical wound, or it can be a serious wound, or you can deal 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 harm, or even like 10 harm, whatever. Or a super, like maybe the blade explodes and tears you to pieces. That's 10 harm, I guess. But I ask for rolls rather, avoid harm when I want to manage the harm. So you can be harmed, but you can also, I take the blade and I can be put in a bad, I can put you, in a bad spot where instead of your heart, it cuts off your arm. That's a very bad spot. You take the shot, but now you can reload the weapon because you have only one arm. And if you want to reload the weapon, you have to stop and act under pressure or whatever, Mm-hmm. And you roll to endure injury to solve harm. That's really, there is to it, that's the final step of dealing with the harm and wound branch of the narrative. So you can be at the very, very, very end of the snowball of moves. I asked for engage in combat. You rolled a -9 and let the shotgun go because he threw a blade at you, and now you can jump for the shotgun again, but he's gonna throw another blade, and this time it's gonna hurt and you might die. And you roll 10 to 14, and instead of death you take 4 harm, and now you roll to endure injury. So that's the very, very end, unless the player rolls 14 or less. In this sense, if they take the shot and kill the rest side and roll 10 to 14, it doesn't really matter if you are thrown off balance. You might be dazed. If you have to escape the situation anyways, it would be nice to see the character getting thrown off balance. So they have a huge blade, in their body somewhere, and they take -1 or -2 ongoing until they flee the scene and get to the hospital or get medical help or whatever. Lose something would usually be the shotgun. So instead of killing the player, I decide that, you're gonna be out of weapons now, and there's a horde of creatures after you because they want to avenge the rest side or whatever. Or it can be you lose your arm if you want to be extreme about it. But it's a 10-14. You don't want to deliver too hard of a consequence. But you can as the GM. But you don't want to do that kind of stuff around 10-14. So you can lose something. Or you can receive a serious wound, which would make sense for the blade throw. And -9, because I know that the player might be under pressure to run from the scene. They will either be tempted to receive a critical wound, which makes sense for the blade throw, again, because I wanted the player to die. They can choose to die, which is okay. They had a chance to escape death, but they now decide that I might die because I'm weak. So that's on the player, that's their story as well. But chances are that they're going to choose receive a critical wound and continue to act and try to flee. They might be knocked out, and this is a chance for you to create another problem. So how long do you get knocked out? For how long? And what happens in this time? It's an opening for you to do whatever you want. And again, it depends on the player, on the GM, on the situation, on the character, on the archetype, on the moves, the player moves that they have, and what happened earlier in the story and what's going to happen now. So it's you having the pressure, the GM pressure, to come up with something cool. And you have to follow your heart, again, just like the Reside's blade. You have to follow your heart and decide what to do and what is fun. But that's the gist of it. You just roll when the situation, when the result could create another problem that is solvable, but you want to solve stuff. And at the end, most of these problems are conflict dependent. So being cornered doesn't matter if the rest side is dead. Jumping for the gun doesn't matter if the rest side is dead. So the more you solve within the combat, the less it matters to just stop it abruptly. So you can kill the rest side by 1 wound. So he has a 10, 15, 20 wound tracker, but the player takes 1 shot with a shotgun, deals 2 harm, and kills the rest side. You can do that, but then there might be other stuff that you could have done. Another thing that you have to keep track of is the environment. So just like a movie, in this, it's nice to look at action movies for reference and to steal things, because you have to always be stealing.
Always.
Look at action moves and watch how they handle, stuff breaking, pushing characters through walls, making them lose their weapon, being beset by a new threat, because it's one of the 10-14 of engaging combat. So for a John Wick style of game like Night Carnage, you might solve a conflict with a minor NPC because you take 2 shots and then you do a barrel roll and you get out in another room, but then you're beset by a new threat and there's this new character that you have to fight. And this can be an infinite 10-14 engages in combats. Ends combats. And you can continue to do that, or you can pull in from other moves and all that. So, but you can, like a movie, you have to focus for the moment, and you can keep focusing the rest side on your turn as a GM, or you can, for example, pan the camera to the structure falling apart, and you have to deal with that. So you create the problem of, we're fighting on a fire escape, typical like big city New York kind of thing, and we're having a knife fight and the structure is falling apart. You have to keep under pressure to maybe get inside an apartment and save yourself or see what happens. So you have to use that to your advantage, all environments. And if you're inexperienced and creating these environmental things, problems, dangers, threats, you have to think about it in the sense of, do I want to introduce an environment that I don't know how to manage? So we have an example of someone in the Discord talking that they had a combat in the sand, in the beach area. Movement is difficult. You might have someone looking at you. You might get the fight to the water, for example. But it's really in an open space, and open spaces are difficult by nature. And when you can't think of that, think of problems in this area, you should guide the game towards areas that you are comfortable with. So smaller rooms, probably cramped rooms. Otherwise, you can always draw from external threats, because there's two GM moves to announce future problems and off-screen problems. And you can make someone call the police, you can make the police arrive, you can make someone record the fighting, you can make someone intervene if it's a bar brawl sort of situation, for example, but that's the actual environment, not outside of it. But you can always, bring stuff from the outside, especially for mundane fights. If you are in a place that it would make sense, the police might be after you afterwards. Even if it's just following up on a bar fight, someone was stabbed and they want to ask if you want to press charges. So all of these kind of minor threats, are also very present in the world. It's not just the rest side, it's someone that recorded you shooting another person that in the video seems like a homeless man. It's not a rest side, because that's the illusion at play. So you can always bring this. But again, pressure. You have to understand that you're creating more problems, and these problems might have to be solved. So when the police arrives, it can be necessary to roll to influence other if you are trying to bribe the man or the woman, the police person, the cop. It might be a problem when you see that someone has recorded the fight and you have to get hold of their cell phone, and you want to enter the apartment and try to find their house, and you will have another minor fight with them. So really think of this as problems you have to solve as a GM. Loose ends, that you have to tie. And for new people, for new GMs, getting used to the idea of combat existing outside of a grid and violence having ramifications, outside of the present moment, it can be difficult and overwhelming, but it gets easier the more you steal from media.
Yeah. In the spirit of always be stealing, what I find helpful is, take for the example, if you really want to have a combat scene on the beach, you can literally put into your search engine, combat on a beach or something. You can search. The internet has literally everything. All movie scenes have probably been put on YouTube or somewhere. You can look things up and watch those scenes and get ideas of what kind of pressure, what kind of consequences, what the general flow of how that's done in movies or TV shows or whatever you happen to find. And just literally take notes. Honestly, I usually have a notepad or I have my phone notes with me when we're watching movies or TV shows, and I write down things like scenes in them that I really, really love, and I use them as inspiration for when I'm running games. It's,
That's nice. I can't shut up. during movies. So we can say that we do the same, but I just verbalize my thoughts.
You just yap about it.
Yeah, I just say, wow, I can't do that in Cult. Oh, that's so cultish. I'm gonna do this next game.
To be fair, we do that also.
Yeah, we do yap during the movie.
Yeah.
That is something.
We have to pause. Like I have to have the controller and I have to pause it and be like, okay, I really need to talk about this scene. I'm so sorry. Like,
That's nice.
I guess speaking of combat, actually, because we're currently rewatching Hannibal, the TV series, and it has some, like, first of all, the tone, the kind of theme of the show is very, I almost called it avant-garde, very, very artistic, and it has beautiful imagery, of course, but it doesn't, despite it being kind of such a violent kind of show, it has this kind of beauty to the combat, because like throughout the show, unless there is combat, everything is very kind of calm and flowing and moving. But then combat erupts and it's like just violence. But it's short, it's swift, and it's quick. And then the combat too. And it's a mess, and the combat ends.
Yeah.
And the next kind of the aftermath. And that is something that I'm kind of doing, or already did before, but like I'm taking now, again, stealing from that idea of how they portray the combat. This is kind of the idea of how I like to do this, and kind of adapt it to the Cult, so kind of games that I'm running.
Yeah, Hannibal is actually a very good touchstone for Cult combat. I think most games benefit from something similar, instead of the John Wick bang bang kind of thing. Yeah. But I mean, go watch John Wick as well, I guess, and see what moves they are rolling for and when and why. But Red Dragon, the Hannibal movie, has a very, very, very nice, very gritty combat. Spoiler, I guess, but it's a 20-year-old movie. There's a very nice combat by the end that shows up in the Hannibal series as well, and we probably know which one we're talking about. But it's a very nice one to look at and dissect the scene as GM moves and player moves and rolls. Very good one, very, very nice one. Because Hannibal has an agenda that goes beyond just killing the person. trying to be spoiler free here, but it goes beyond just two main characters killing each other. So it's nice.
He not only has an agenda. Sorry.
No, go on.
He not only has an agenda, but it's like a very refined, specific agenda, and he has a very refined, specific personality. So you, as a viewer, and if you're relating that to a Cult game as a player, you know how they're going to act by and large, by their personality, by their agenda, because you have specified it. And and that is going to reflect in the moves that you make as far as the combat is concerned.
On the topic of Hannibal, if we imagine that Hannibal is a player and you have this final showdown between two player characters, it can be difficult to say who is gonna roll, because by now I assume you have you as the GM listener to this has you have a better grasp at when and why to call for moves. But one player wants to hide, another wants to find them. You can most of the time handle this by having the player that is the passive actor, so that they want to hide, and the active actor that wants to find, rolling different things. So the passive rolls to help or hinder. So Hannibal would roll to hide with help or hinder, and penalize Will Graham's role. That would be observe a situation, for example. The same would go for read a person. The same would go for any other move that you want. But when you let players roll against each other, you have to make a negotiation most of the time out of character and see if everyone's in the same page of, oh, we're gonna kill each other. Okay, so we have to be smart about this real quick and be a bit more detailed. And you have to focus, and when you do that, it's almost always focusing on who is better or worse at something. So if Will Graham is really good at getting shots and Hannibal is not a very violent, dodgy, nimble person that will have difficult dodging shots, you have to choose, do I want Hannibal to act under pressure here and do something and avoid get shot, maybe avoid harm or whatever? Or do I want to focus on Will Graham's ability with a handgun? There's no right or wrong. It's up to you and the players and the characters and the scene. So if you've been playing up the campaign to the moment that Hannibal, the player of Hannibal, acts out and finally gets to do a super villainous thing, you have to know whether you want a villain to have a higher chance of winning or not. If you're playing for a hero thing, bittersweet moment of whether, something bad happens, but then Hannibal is killed, that can also bring some uncertainty. But that's what you do. If player characters are relations, just have the keep it together moment of harming the other at a crucial moment. For example, Will gets to corner Hannibal and may do a final shot, headshot, and kill Hannibal. Might be good to reserve keep it together minus relation, modified by relation at this point. And just be careful, because we know moves create other situations, and one move will create opportunities for the other player. So if I roll to act under pressure, the other player, has the chance of acting in my 10 to 14 or -9. So try to have a threat. One player makes a threat, so, I'm gonna slit your son's throat. And the other player rolls, and if it's a -9, they, you get to have the other player deliver the threat or something. And if it happens that one will endure injury against harm, you can have them be unbalanced or, take a wound or whatever. Just know that instead of the spotlight coming back to you as the GM, you bring the spotlight to the other player and probably work with them what makes sense. So would you counterattack in this 10 to 14, engage in combat? If so, you can just deal harm and you solve like a NPC attack. So you can let the other player endure injury, deal a serious wound, whatever. Just remember the attack moves from the other episode. Each equipment has one and have the players choose, and that's it for player versus player. And who gets to win, it's up to the dice and negotiations and you, I guess.
Yeah. I think what's helpful for me when the game is looking like it's turning into player versus player, before things really go down, or when somebody initiates, I want to punch this person in the face, or I want to shoot at this person, I want to shoot at this other player. I think having a pause and saying okay, what is your intention with attacking this person? What are your intentions? What do you want to get out of this scene as the player character? And having established that, and then having it openly established so that the two players know what the other is thinking, and then they can play that out within the scene. And that's part of the negotiation, right? Because if the other player is like, oh, that's actually very fun, and I actually might let myself get my ass kicked by this other player because that's more interesting, and then that leads to something else, or it's all part of the negotiation. And again, it depends on the players, depends on, because I tend to play with people who are more than willing to put their player character through a lot of shit before or during the game, because it's more interesting, it's more fun, they have more fun with the situation. So having just laying it all out beforehand and laying out intentions before the actual scene gets started can be helpful, especially if you're newer at GMing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sign under that. That's my contribution.
Nice. I pretty much would also sign that. And for newer GMs, kind of consider that maybe not go all the way like intrigue map in that aspect here, but like if you have your antagonists kind of written out, as Crystal stated at the beginning, you've kind of made the connections, and you can anticipate like this combat doesn't need to happen. This is just a confrontation, can be solved differently, but this is going to be the big boss fight. You can prepare for it already from the get-go. And then, as we said as well, most importantly, just listen to your players, what they actually want to do. If they don't want to fight the big, bad, ugly, then don't force the fight.
Or each other.
Yeah. Also, most of the fights you can do in one roll.
Mm-hmm.
Have
Exactly.
a threat and have a condition of winning for the player, and on a 10 to 14 both can happen, but otherwise it swings, either you do what you want or the player. So for a typical bar brawl could be a simple act under pressure, and this is where my house rule comes in. I let players roll to act under pressure with almost all attributes, because I like to have a general role. But in this bar brawl kind of thing would be act under pressure with violence. But sometimes it's just about the willingness to hurt someone, so you can just roll to keep it together. Oh, you have the willingness, but it's gonna scar you mentally, and you lose one stability and become angry or guilt-ridden afterwards. But yeah, you deliver the beat down of this person's life, and they're gonna remember your knuckles in their face forever. But you don't roll violence, you don't roll coolness, or it's just willpower and the willingness to hurt someone else. So most fights, minor fights, you want to be fairly contained. Otherwise, you'll be trapped in 15 minutes of combat, juggling environments and stuff to do and problems to create and problems to solve, and it's just too much. So it's better to, do those things when it's a actual nice opponent, an engaging opponent with an engaging agenda and probably a good side goal. So not just your opponent, but your opponent and helping someone getting an item, escaping someplace, that you can have roles to other stuff outside of combat. But yeah, that's a wrap from me.
Okay.
Beyond this is only death, and that's just the beginning.
Ah, he said the thing.
Dun dun dun. He said the thing.
Fantastic. So I guess if you have any other questions, we have our form linked at the description of this video. You can also find us on Discord and all the usual places. And yeah, I think this will be it for this episode, and we'll be back with another one soon. Thank you
Follow
very much.
your heart and always be stealing.
Always be stealing.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.